Willkommen, bienvenue, and welcome. I'm Rob Doherty, and this is the Festivus Podcast Executive Edition, supported by Liberry Consulting and hosted by Julian Scott, the animation consultant for Film London. In this podcast series, we'll be chatting to the movers and the shakers in the animation industry, and discovering a little bit more about what they do, how they got there, their thoughts on the animation industry, and I hope get to meet the person behind that executive title. Today's guest in the virtual Festivus studio is Andrew Kavanagh. Alongside his business partner at Kavaleer, Gary Timpson, Andrew has ridden the Celtic Tiger through all its ups and downs, creating and producing award-winning shows such as Kiva Can Do, Alva's World, and Wildernuts. Wildernuts. Julian and Andrew managed to cover a lot of ground in this chat, from how, at school, Andrew used art as a defence tactic, his and Gary's early days in Irish animation as the industry started to take hold there, to his more recent ADHD diagnosis and what that has meant to him and how it's given him new focus and drive to the shows he develops and produces. We might also cover caricatures, who sings the best karaoke in the industry, and what advice Andrew was given when he started out as a company owner. This episode is a belter, so sit back, relax, and let Andrew's gift of the gab delight and beguile you.
Andrew, thanks so much for joining us on the podcast.
Thank you so much for having me, Julian. It's a pleasure to be here.
Great. Well, listen, just sort of recapping on you and who you are and everything else. You've won several awards as a writer, director, producer and show creator. And together with your business partner, Gary Timpson, over the last 21 years, you've built Kavaleer Productions into one of the longest established independent animation studios in Ireland. You produce content for public service broadcasters, streamers alike. You've created shows like Kiva Can Do, Alva's World, and Wildernuts. I was going to say Wildernuts.
It is Wildernuts. You're right.
It is Wildernuts. I was right. Okay.
It's a minefield, that one.
I'm glad you're here. But what people may not know is you are a professional caricaturist, a renowned karaoke singer, and you create live drawings of the contestants of BBC quiz shows every week on social media. That's quite a portfolio of stuff.
It's just me. It's just me, random by nature, and a bit of a show off. So yeah, I've kind of done a little bit of everything, but all kind of circling around creative activities.
Excellent. Now, Should we go a little bit further back in your life to a young Andrew? I mean, you've clearly got a very, very active and creative mind, and it sounds pretty much like you don't stop. Was that you from an early age?
Absolutely. Yeah, I was a very hyperactive child. Not sporty though. So, usually involved shenanigans around the housing estate I grew up on. But there always seemed to be a kind of a story to be evolved out of that, So when I was a kid, I used to do comic strips of me and my friends' adventures and stuff like that. So it was always some sort of creative outlet to that. As well, I still have some of those as well to blackmail people with in future times.
Was it a big family, big creative family?
Not really. Like I was, I kind of subsequently found out I had an uncle who wrote poetry, and another one who was a kind of did artistic kind of endeavors, but like not really. I mean, to be honest with you, my dad was just a brilliant storyteller, and I think I got the singing bug from him as well. He was a big kind of showman at weddings and sometimes funerals, but he would always get up and sing his numbers, but like he was brilliant at just crafting stories he worked in Guinness and, I don't know how many people were there. There must have been like thousands of employees back in the day. And he had stories about all of them. And even though I'd never met these men, like I had vivid pictures in my head of what they looked like and how they walked and how they drank pints and whatever else, and their exploits. So I think that sort of filtered into me a bit, but like there was definitely no kind of artist of note in the family prior to me coming along.
And at school with the things going on at school, the sort of the creative stuff, art and sort of storytelling, and I was going to say English, which is probably inappropriate. Irish, I should say, that inspired you.
Well, I mean, it was we had we have our own version of English here, which academically is known as Hiberno-Irish, which is, exemplified by the likes of Joyce and Yeats and people like that. But we learned Irish in school, the native language, but it was pretty hard going. There was no TV station back then, and the radio reports were all very boring, so like in media, it wasn't that present. So, as kids, you didn't really engage with the language on any great level. But for me, school was a bit of a drudge, I was, sort of a geeky kid. So, my way of avoiding being beaten up in the playground was to draw sort of vicious caricatures of my teachers and circulate these amongst the various students in the class, and that got me out of trouble for a long time until the teachers discovered the drawings, which is a whole other matter. So I always found that art was a good way of deflecting from the harshness of reality from a very early age.
So these caricatures that you do now and the live stuff you do for the BBC quiz shows and things, that started at an early age then?
Yeah, I mean, it was always, I've been drawing since I could, hold a pencil. And my mother still has stuff I did when I was like 6 years old or whatever, where I was copying Beano and Beezer and the Dandy, So I learned by imitation, and I loved the comic strip form, particularly those Fleet Street comics of the day, and the kind of 3-panel syndicated comics like Beagle Bailey and, that sort of thing, Haggard the Horrible. Those were my kind of inspirations for drawing, so a very simple form of drawing really, but kind of impactful and caricatured, yeah.
And were there, inspirational things on, you said that in the Irish language TV station, there wasn't an awful lot going on, but presumably you were watching cartoons, on TV series and films and things like that.
Yeah, I grew up in Dublin, so we didn't have, like yourselves in the UK, we had a limited sort of TV menu available to us, but we did have UTV, which was the Ulster version of ITV, and we had BBC as well. So I was exposed to kind of Noel Edmonds Swap Shop on a Saturday morning, and, the cartoons that were like, it was all very blocked out, Saturday afternoon or very early in the morning. But RTE was, at the time, and God bless them, like they've come along so much. But back in the 70s, they used to buy, kind of Eastern European propaganda films. So I was exposed to the kind of the works of Jan Lenice and Valerian Borowczyk at a very early age, not realizing what I was watching, but it was all kind of like sound effects and onomatopoeia and extremely violent, a lot of cigar smoking, I remember. So when I went to Annecy, I was like, first time I went to Annecy and I was watching a retrospective of that, I was like, are RTE sponsoring this? What is this, So, but they did have Scooby-Doo, and they still show, the classic Scooby-Doos on RTE. So, I'm somewhere between, kind of Bulgarian, kind of formative, sort of brutalist art and Hanna-Barbera, so somewhere in the middle, something formed,
It explains so much.
There you go. Yeah. A lot of therapy for that.
So, but I mean, what led you into thinking of, did you think about animation as a career? Was that something in your mid-teens you thought, I know what I want to do. I want to get into animation?
Not at all. It absolutely did not ever think it was an option for me. I wanted to be an archaeologist from the time I was, I think I saw Raiders of the Lost Ark when I was about 10, and I went, there's something in that inspired me. I thought, well, first of all, he's a bit of a geezer. He likes digging holes, which I was very good at, as my mother will tell you, and stayed in the back garden. I was always digging up crockery and crap out of the flower beds. And I thought, yeah, I can, is that a career? I can do that. I can dig holes, and I can give me a bit of a geezer. So I thought that's what I was going to do. And I still have an abiding kind of interest in that. And then Don Bluth opened his studio in Dublin in 1986. And I think the year before I left secondary school, you know, at the time, like everybody was trying to get you away from an art career. Like I was lucky my parents didn't try to do that. But the careers advisors in the school were like, you know, I know you're good at art, but, you know, it's not really an option for a career. It was kind of, you know, there was some graphic design and work around Dublin in the advertising space and sign writing, mural painter, you know, these were your career options as an artist. So it was never occurred to me. And, only in my final year, I was like, you know, I think they announced the course in Ballyfermot College, which was the first animation school, in Ireland around 88, 89. And I thought, well, I'm going to have a crack at that because, you know, I like cartoons. I like to draw. I like to write. Maybe I could do something with that.
And is that where you went?
I did, yeah, in 1990. Both myself and Gary Timpson, who is my business partner, Kavaleer, we met 35 years ago now.
Wow.
On the first day of that course. So yeah, we're I think we were the second year of it. And we had a very smart principal there, a guy called Jerome Morrissey, who realized that it was kind of a poly, you know, I think it would be the kind of way of classifying it for UK listeners. It was like a polytechnic.
Uh-huh.
And, you know, they didn't really have much of a facility. Now, at the time, all you needed was pencil and, some, you know, very specific shape of paper and size of paper. But, the most expensive bit was like the hole punch for the paper. So what we used to do was get like, you know, typing paper. Just punch holes in it, put it on a peg bar, and we were away. You know, you could make a film that way. So, but we had a really smart teacher or principal who managed to get in guest lecturers from the Sullivan Bluth, as they were known, to come up, you know, and work some sort of magic, because it was quite difficult to, you know, with the red tape to get teaching positions at the time, but managed to orchestrate that. And also to have Sheridan College in Toronto, sort of, you know, as the body that sort of signed off on the diploma, as it was then, you know, it's a degree now. But it was, so the first 2 years of graduates from the course, were also given a Sheridan College diploma, which was fairly, you know, one of the top colleges in the world at the time. And essentially they took their curriculum and brought it to Dublin. And this was the standard that they needed for animators, cleanup artists, in-betweeners going into the Don Bluth studio. So, they needed to be good coming out of there. So we had a really good standard of education. You know, in a very, you know, kind of a very suburban part of West Dublin, with not a huge amount else going on academically there, but it very quickly kind of became, famous in Ireland and then internationally afterwards.
That's fascinating, because one of the things that, you know, again, I don't know if it's the same in Ireland, but it's happened in the UK, is there's been this sort of perceived disconnect between academia and the industry, and the industry saying that, you know, when the graduates come out of uni with their degree, they're not work ready, and academia have to follow certain rules, which the government laid down. But it sounds like, you know, what was going on there was that it really was like academia responding to what the industry needed and saying, okay, we're going to do all this to get people out of our teaching environment who can actually go and work in this studio.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, it was, and to be honest with you, as I said, like, you know, there was a woodwork course in this building, and the guy who, you know, sort of ran the woodworking course made all the desks for the,
is that right?
So, you know, it was all bodged together, but it was, the biggest outlay was they had to, and also kind of cut the perspex discs. So originally we didn't have like proper, animation discs. So, you know, but it was sort of bodged together. You know, they got different courses together. They managed to create classroom environments. You know, the only thing they had to send off the Chromacolor for the peg bars, which were reasonably cheap, you know, for the sort of portable ones. You know, for memory serves, they were about £5 to buy, you know, if you needed to order one. But other than that, and then, you know, the paper, ultimately the paper had to be ordered. If you were doing a final film or something, you had to get that specific sort of dimensions of animation paper. So, but the rest of the time when we were practicing, we were using typing paper and, you know, whatever, we were cutting up sheets of A3 and, it wasn't ideal because it would crease and, would rip after a while, after flipping for a while. So it wasn't ideal, but for it to learn on, it was perfectly fine, But yeah, very sort of can-do attitude behind this, and the willingness to kind of bend the rules a bit. And, and also just really an amazing kind of crop of talent in those first couple of years, including the brown bag guys and the jam guys and all those, Boulder Media guys, the founders of those companies were all there in the first like 3 or 4 years of that course.
So it sounds like Irish animation pretty much started all at the same time in the same place.
Yeah, I know. There's Steve Woods, he'd be a great man, much better positioned than me to kind of talk about the history of it. But he's just written a book called Drawing the Line, which sort of charts it from the very early days, the kind of indie guys in their garden sheds, through this kind of massive change that happened around the time that blues landed in Ireland, and how that sort of exploded. I think there were 100 of us on day one of that course, which is like a lot of students to bring into a very new program. And then, by the time I graduated, there were 16. So it was quite tough, to get through all of it. Like by the end of it, like the first year was a portfolio year. So there was animation as part of it, but you could also kind of go off to the graphics or fine art or whatever, you felt was kind of, lighting your fire. But a lot of people did try and stick with it, but it was really tough. Like, it was kind of like Disney standards education, because shortly after Bluth kind of set up in Dublin, Disney opened in Paris, and that became the target for the graduates at that point. They made Tarzan there, and, I think it was one of the first movies, the Goofy movie, and a couple of other things that were done in the 90s. But that became the target. And then Warner's opened in London. They opened the 2D studio in London. So the standards kept going up all the time. And yeah, by the time I got out of there, 16 graduates that year.
Wow. That's quite a high rate of attrition there, isn't it?
Very high, yeah. But all, and I'd love to say they're all still in industry, but like they've kind of gone off to do different things. Like one of the guys in my class owns like about 10 pubs in London now. So he's probably the richest of the lot of us. And, Gary was in my graduating year, and, I'm trying to think who else, there's a guy called Bill Hodman, who was, Tobias Schwartz, like people who've gone, and Matthias Lechner, who designed, the CBs for Netflix. So there was quite a few of us who were in the industry, but like, out of that year, maybe Robert Cullen started Boulder that year. So handful of entrepreneurs, there's only, I think, one guy who's not still in the creative professions, but like, he just he did 5 years of it and went, that's enough for me. Walk the other direction. But, but a lot of kind of business sort of oriented people, and, but very creatively wired business people.
Cool. And when you came out of there, when you graduated, was your first project animated?
Yeah, when I came out of there, I went to work in Brown Bag, and they had just started, they were making a TV show called Peg, and I really wanted to work on it because I don't know what the equivalent would be in the UK, but like, say you're learning a dialect, like, we were learning the Irish language, and we had to do this book as part of our leaving certificate, which was the final exam secondary, and it was called Peg. And it was just the most dismal, miserable sort of, just a drudge to get through. It was set in, down on the Blasket Islands, and, it was all about like the mortality of like the island life, it was kind of the Irish Germinal, and we all hated it. So it was the kind of unifying factor was really, really nobody I've ever met liked Peg. So the guys in Brown Bag decided to do a parody of it, which was, now when I look back on it, was quite South Parky, and, just absolutely just ripped it to pieces, for comedic value, and, was very hotly anticipated by every student who'd gotten through the leaving cert in Ireland. So I was like, I have to work on this. So that was my first job. And my second job was, I was working on a thing called the Story Keepers, which was, funded by the Baptist Church of America, and was in a now defunct studio called Shepherd Films, which was in the old warehouse of Bluth. Like they set up in there. And And so I was sat down on the first day to, and I was storyboarding all that. So I was given a script, and it was like I had to storyboard Jesus on my first day, and I got in, and like nobody knew where I was supposed to sit, and I just picked a desk that looked like a decent desk, and at lunchtime, like the guy who was my supervisor came down and he goes, "What are you doing sitting at that desk?" And I was like, "Why? What's the problem?" He goes, "That's Don's desk." So there's Don Bluth. So I was like, "Oh, sorry." By this stage, Don Bluth was in Phoenix in Arizona, so I don't think he needed the desk. But, so that was my auspicious beginning, sort of using the boss's desk to animate Jesus, or to story for Jesus on my second day.
I can imagine what your memoir is going to be titled.
Yeah. Don desk.
But you've done stuff, as well as animation, fairly. I mean, I think the start of Kavaleer that was live action, wasn't it? Was that a live action show?
Well, I did it. Did you know? I did it. So your research is very good. I was trying to get it. Like, I mean, I don't know if this is what you're referring to, but we, myself and my writing partner, who was the lead in Kavaleer, we ended, this is not something that's very generally known, but we were set ourselves up as writers. We weren't planning on starting an animation studio, so we pitched an idea to RTE, called Eerie Era, right? Which was a kind of an Irish X-Files. It was a paranormal investigation show where me and my friend Phil, who were the writers, would be the investigators. But they took one look at us and went, "No, I don't think so, lads. We'll get some." So we shot a pilot, with, kind of like sort of alternative people. Like they're Mulder and Scully. And the guy we were working with on that was Shay Healy, who was, who won the Eurovision with Johnny Logan in 1981. He wrote What's Another Year? He was a producer. He passed away sadly a few years ago, but so we were working with him and Marion Cullen, who went on to work with, the Zig and Zag guys on an adult show, years afterwards. But yeah, we shot a pilot for that. And, we did shoot another, I sketched comedy for TG Carr when it started, where they did let me perform. Thankfully, those tapes have been deleted. I know. But the first Kavaleer thing with Kavaleer on it was called From an Evil Cradling, which was a very serious short film based on the book by Brian Keenan, who or people of a certain generation will remember was a hostage with Terry Waite in Lebanon in the 1980s. And it was based on a chapter of his book. So, but that was animated. Yeah.
Okay. And that presumably, required, I suppose, getting an option on the book and all the kind of usual sort of stuff that you have to do.
Yeah. That's what it should have involved. Yeah. But I didn't know that at the time. And I went to, I filled out an application and I sent it into, it's still going, it's called Frameworks, but it was like the first sort of thing where Joe Blogs could send in an application to, Screen Ireland, or the Irish Film Board as it was then, and, apply for funding. You got 35 grand to do a short film, and, I was like, I'll put in an application, and then, I got a phone call saying I'd been shortlisted. And I was like, great. And they said, well, your interview is on such and such a date. And, you need to, just come along, be relaxed, but, bring make sure you have the option with you, and I was like, cool. So I hung up the phone and I was like, what's an option? No idea what they were just asking me for. So I called some people and they were like, oh, you don't have the option. Oh, well, it's a legal kind of, So, but here's a great example of serendipity. I was so distracted it was the night before the interview, and I was so distracted. I was kind of pacing the flat, and my girlfriend said, "Let's go and see a movie." So we went down to see this French movie, and it was just couldn't pay attention to the movie. And she was like, "Are you all right?" And I said, "Yeah, just worried about this interview tomorrow." And I'm looking everywhere but at the screen, and then I noticed 4 rows in front of me is Brian Keenan sitting watching the same movie. Wow. Never seen it before in my life. And famous recluse, it was somebody who never had PTSD and didn't go out much, So I was like, okay, went out to the lobby afterwards, didn't see him. went into the men's room and he walks up beside me at the urinal with Brian Keenan. And I was like, I've got to say something, so I cut a long story short, I got the option, not in any untoward way. He said, come and talk to me outside, call me. He called his agents. Actually, Kenneth Branagh had the option. And,
is that right?
They did kind of a carve out. Yeah, he made a movie called Blind Flight, which was based on Evil Cradling. But the chapter that I wanted to adapt was not covered. In some way, they did some sort of a workaround. So I was able to take a section of the book, and adapt that for animation, which was it was about his, he was in sensory deprivation, in this 6x4, tiny little concrete bunker, and, in Lebanon with the heat and no air. And, he started to hallucinate, and we animated his hallucinations essentially. And he did the voice for it as well, which was extraordinary.
Fantastic. And that's a great thing, isn't it, about animation, is you can take someone's hallucinations and visualize them for other people.
Yeah. And it was hard going, because he had to come in and look at that and, tell me if I was kind of on the money, is this where you were, is this what it looked like in your head? And, and then he also had to kind of recreate, because doing the voice, he had to kind of recreate some of the emotional trauma. And I had a very, an amazing, guy voice directing on that, who, Marcus McAneil, and he managed to get the performance out of Brian. He wasn't an actor, obviously, or an English teacher, actually. But he wasn't, he didn't know what he was getting in for, I don't think, for Brian. But, he did the performance and he attended the premiere, and, we sat together at that was 1997. So, a long time ago now, but it definitely caught the bug from that experience. It was like learning everything. I'm, going to a premiere within 8 months,
Wow.
How do I produce something? How do I do this? How do I do that? So it was no safety net, okay, here, be a studio, we luckily we got through that. And I should mention Keith Foran, who runs the animation course now in Dunleary in Dublin, which is, another big course here in Dublin, and he was the co-director on that and co-producer. So, he's gone into, education now, but we worked together quite a lot in the early days.
So it really was Kavaleer's start was really a baptism of fire, wasn't it?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, we were both working on for a company called Coco Television, which is a kind of a reality in formats. It's still going. They produce a lot of content for the Irish market, but they had this tiny little animation wing, run by an English woman, Caroline Dunn, and Owen Fitzpatrick, who was one of the most talented artists I've ever met in my life. Sadly passed away a few months back. But these two, we were total opposites. She was super gregarious, outgoing, gorgeous to look at, all this kind of stuff. And he was this, little kind of very nervous guy, very intense, but just gifted artist, an amazing guy. Anybody who ever worked with him, and there weren't that many who got the opportunity, because he was quite hard to work with, but they were all Jesus, they never came across anything like him in terms of his talent. So they had this very kind of, and it kind of prepared me for, the types of personalities you need to make a studio work. You need the kind of sales, the outgoing person, the one who's going to go out and, get the jobs in. And then you need the backroom guy who's going to knock it out of the park every time on quality. But we were, myself and Keith were there at the time. And so we had facilities available to us. We could test and, we could do kind of rough cuts and stuff like that. But but after that, I knew that after that experience, if I was going to do it again, I'd have to build that from scratch. So it was a partial baptism of fire. It was baptism of lukewarm water, let's say, and then the baptism of fire came later.
So it was around here, I presume, that you decided that, okay, Kavaleer is going to be an animation studio. You've been doing some stuff which was probably not the most commercial. I mean, it was obviously very creatively driven, story driven, passion driven. What was it that made you think, actually, if we're going to run a studio, we're going to make a success of this, we're probably going to have to do something which is a bit more mainstream?
Yeah. Well, I mean, that was probably where Gary came along, that was in 2003. So we officially kind of, set up the company in 2001. And, at the time we were just doing shorts. So we made 3 more shorts during that time. We started to, explore the idea of creating IP and what we needed in terms of materials, editorial materials to do that. And it was like very much kind of like 2 or 3 guys doing everything really. Gary came along end of 2003 and he'd been working commercially. So he'd been in London and Brisbane and he was, and been working, on TV stuff like service stuff for Warner's and, kind of early interactive stuff and that kind of thing. So he was like, okay, we should probably, we had been doing little bits and pieces. I've been subcontracting from Brown Bag and, I'd done, we actually did a little bit of Mr. Bean, which was, with Varga and I can't remember the other guys. Happy Life, was it in Sweden? Anyway, we were getting little bits of work here and there, but, we then became like really doing everything at that point, to try and, the goal was to get a wage out of it, which took another couple of years. But, we were doing every single thing, like, mobile phone stuff, e-learning, CD-ROM, interactive CD-ROMs, and it was all still being done largely by hand, which was insane when you think about it. But, we needed money in order to kind of get machines in and to kind of build our infrastructure. So very kind of, and still doing like, our own IP and developing things within that time. So when we did finally get out, it was a number of years later before we went out, pitching shows. But, at that stage, we'd established ourselves as like, we could make some money. And we were building a team. So around 2006 or so, we were, we had a lot of people, doing kind of very much service work. But, it was teaching us as we went along how to manage larger and larger teams.
Right. Because that's the other thing that I think in our industry, in the business of animation, that sometimes doesn't happen is people start small, they have an idea, something comes off, they build and build and build, but they've never had the management training, if you like, never had the business training about how to turn creativity into a business. But that's again is something that you and Gary and the team have clearly nailed over the years.
Yeah, I think, I think it's true of the whole sector here, that there were very few studios that came out of, were started by former managers. And you did have, aside from Bluth, you had some other companies. There was a company called Terraglyph, which was doing kind of interactive work. And they also did some movies and stuff, back in the day, but those kind of, multi-territory co-productions, for feature film. So there were definitely experienced people in the production and management space. But really what happened was there was kind of a vacuum created around 1995 or 6, where all of the American studios, pretty much disappeared, more or less overnight. Bluth went back to Arizona. Terraglyph lasted another year or so, and there were other ones as well. Murakami Wolf, of course, he did the first TV show of Ninja Turtles. They closed their doors kind of shortly after that as well. So there was definitely a vacuum, and if you hadn't left the country, which was the kind of fate of every generation up until ours, we were like, we better start something ourselves. So it was very much learning from the ground up, and I think you see, like with the newer studios now as well, a lot of the founders of those studios have come through the likes of Brown Bag or Kavaleer at a formative time. And saw us doing it because, it was very kind of, it wasn't partitioned or compartmentalized to any great degree. It was very kind of an organic sort of environment, so I probably learned a lot about management just from sitting, 20 feet away from Conal Gaffney, animating the scene while he was on a phone call to a funder, that kind of thing. So it was, osmosis really. But as time went on, obviously you do pick up, you pick up, and you kind of leverage soft skills and whatever, but we're probably quite a different business to, your general sort of, studio. And I've noticed that there is a kind of clear difference between the Irish thing and what we see in the UK or in the US. You know, we come from different roots. And we very much kind of like still feel very close to the inception of the whole industry. So, you know, we're all old enough to remember that when there was no studios, really, you know, and we had to kind of invent it for ourselves.
This podcast is made possible thanks to the support of the awesome Liberi Consulting. Liberi offers specially tailored industry-related training courses. Check them out at libericonsulting.com. That's LIBERI consulting.com. You can also find links to their fantastic courses on the Festivus website.
So coming back to you personally, and you as a person, you've been very open about your ADHD. Was that, and I, you know, I have to be, I'm quite naive about it myself, but how and when did you get diagnosed with that? Was that something that was sort of fairly early on when you were young, or was it something that you discovered as you got a bit older?
No, so I was 43.
Uh-huh.
And what happened was my kid was, my eldest boy was being tested, or no, we wanted to get him tested, you know, to see if there was, some neurodiversity happening. He hadn't started primary school at that point, but we noticed kind of certain things that, you know, we were hoping to, you know, to try and give him a head start, you know, if that was the case. So, so I was waiting on an appointment for him, and having ADHD, you don't have much patience. So I said, look, I'm going to, as I read about it, I was like, oh, hold on a minute. This is like all of these symptoms I have, right? No question.
Uh-huh.
So I called the guy and I said, listen, can you see if I'd come in for, it was a guy called David Carey. He was a psychologist there. And he said, yeah, come in. Like, you know, this was kind of off the books Sunday morning kind of a thing. I went out to his clinic and, you know, did all the standard testing and everything else. And he was like 100%, no question, you know, you have ADHD. And I was like, it was a while later before we managed to get an appointment for my son. But, you know, he was then diagnosed with ADHD as well. And then I suppose the thing about it is that then, you know, you kind of you look back on everything, you know, it's happened up until that point. And you realize that, you know, there were certain amounts of inevitability, you know, into me doing what I do, because, you know, it is intensely kind of creative in a lot of ways, right? You know, I'm like really passionate about ideas and development and, you know, sort of, and jumping around from different, you know, kind of popcorn, jumping around from different, you know, parts of the creative process. So there's nothing too specialized about what I do. And I was like, well, this is, and it tends to be an entrepreneurial trait as well. So there's like a large proportion of entrepreneurs have this condition. You know, in the creative industries in particular, you know, and, I was in Animation Dingle at the weekend. And I think I was probably the first, you know, when I got my diagnosis, I was like, well, do I stay quiet about it or do I announce it, you know? And I was thinking, you know, that scene from the first Iron Man movie where he's not meant to say he's Iron Man and he just says, I'm Iron Man. He just he's doing a speech and he just goes, oh, it's me, you know? And I was probably the first one to do that, but like loads of people now that I know in the sector, in the industry, colleagues, you know, employees, all this kind of thing. There's a comfort now coming forward and there's much more knowledge about it, even in the 9 years since my diagnosis. It's huge amount more knowledge, huge amount more acceptance. I don't know if that's true of every profession, but it's a positive advantage, I think, in the creative professions. Because it's just, you know, it's an ability to kind of turn your hand to many things and to kind of draw upon reserves of energy that, you know, would, you know, fatigue another person, you know, if they have the same task list in front of them. And so long as it interests me, that's the downside of it is that I have to do quite a lot of things that don't interest me quite as much. But anyway, yeah, there are workarounds, and yeah, like I find myself kind of very fortunate with the team we have here, and you know, we all kind of play to our talents, let's say.
And some people I've heard say that, you know, when they were diagnosed, they found it a relief because they couldn't figure out why some things were more challenging than they felt they should be. And as soon as they knew what it was. I suppose if you want to say put a label on it, I don't mean putting a label on it, but understanding what it was that was creating these challenges, they could sort of relax into being who they were. And as you just said, you find workarounds, but they would find tools and, you know, ask their employer if they could have some reasonable adjustments to their working environment in order to give their best. And is that what happened to you?
Yeah. No, well, I mean, obviously I was 15 years into, you know, my business at that point. And, you know, the business in some ways, you know, when I look back, one of the reasons I started the business was that, you know, I could see myself being a dreadful employee for somebody else, you know, in many ways, because, you know, I would often be challenging, you know, my employer, kind of saying, well, I've got a better idea, you know, I'm not supposed to say that, you know, that kind of thing, or you know, or do something that was additional to what I was, you know, or whatever it is, or go off on tangents. So I was like, for me, it was, I kind of took a U-turn. I went off and taught for a while, you know, I went back into teaching, you know, a couple of years out of college myself. And, you know, quite a lot of us, you know, did that. You know, there were teaching jobs and there was a lot of students coming up through the courses. And I found that very amazingly stimulating, you know, like working with students and helping them draw out, you know, their talents and so on, you know. And I was like, well, that was a really good experience for me then as an employer, I think, later on, because it was like, I saw so many different types of, and now looking back on it, Julian, like, you know, the amount of neurodiverse people in animation, particularly animators, you know, as proportionally, you know, it's, if you don't kind of make accommodations, like it's more than neurotypicals you see less of, to be quite honest. Yeah. You tend to be in the production roles. You tend to go, you know, like, the production management, the coordinating and stuff like that. But like on the creative side, it's like, it's almost, you know, it's the exception rather than the rule. So it was, that was all very useful for me. And I suppose it took me so long to realize that, you know, I was neurodiverse, because I'd been pretty much, since I went to college at 17 and started in Ballyfermot, I'd been surrounded by neurodiverse people, you know, my friends, you know, my colleagues, my employees, and, you know, people I worked with, you know, so this, you know, we're there are a lot of us, let's say.
And I mean, some of the shows that you've created over the years, you know, have had some form of disability or inclusion at their heart. Lead characters or stories, and, you know, your recent preschool series, Adam Loves Adventure. Is your neurodiversity something that drives that desire to be inclusive in your storytelling?
I think I was doing it before I knew, and I just find those characters really interesting, you know. Like, I'm a big Sherlock Holmes fan, and, you know, there's no question Sherlock Holmes, you know, the way he's written in Conan Doyle stories is very much on the spectrum. But, you know, the TV shows that I enjoyed have those kind of quirky characters, you know. I always found those sort of personalities really interesting. But I think as we went on, we just found ourselves kind of more and more working, and, you know, hardwiring sort of diversity into, you know, which I suppose when we started doing it, there wasn't a huge amount of diversity in terms of, you know, disability or different abilities, right, in preschool, particularly. And, you know, we did see, and it's still very much underrepresented. If you think about the proportion of any population that has, you know, different abilities or is neurodiverse or whatever it might be, you know, it's, we don't see that level of representation anywhere in movies, on TV, you know, in advertising, print or TV or whatever it might be. So, you know, it was really important for me, to try to, you know, and it's not even highlighting that aspect. It's just having somebody of whom, you know, that's part of their makeup. That's part of their character makeup. So we're right in the middle of Adam Loves Adventure at the moment. And that's been an absolute joy, because rather than me sort of kind of concocting, an idea about a child, you know, who uses the wheelchair, you know, kind of going around the galaxy, I'm working with a kid who actually, you know, has that as a stream, you know, who inspired me to come up with the format, because, that's what his drawing when he was 6 years old, you know, he wanted to work for NASA. And I was like, well, why don't we just make a cartoon where you can go and explore the universe. And he's working with us now on the show. He's doing his own voice and, contributes ideas, and, some of our characters are inspired by his ideas and so on, so it's very much kind of his world, in a sort of, blown large, let's say, on kind of galactic levels, and, but the fact that he's in a wheelchair is like really secondary. And it was something that I was kind of mindful of when we were writing it. We're very neurodiverse writing on this as well. Right. But I was like, please do not make a big deal of it. In fact, we gave the wheelchair a personality. So it's his wheelchair, actually, who he calls Speedy. And, it's a character in the show. And so they're kind of like a little double act, to some degree. But I was like, let's just kind of, like, Speedy's involved in everything Adam does, right? Adam, Speedy is there to help Adam, right? But like, just concentrating the character of Speedy in the way that Adam thinks of Speedy as a kind of personality, he that's the way he views the wheelchair. So I'm like, just write it that way, and we'll come up, and we're coming up with something that's now it's like just, I was like, how much kind of, what about the representation, and, how sensitive do we need to be, and so on. And the family are involved every step of the way. So, they get the scripts, they look over the scripts and give us the feedback on it. But it has just turned into a pure sitcom set in space. And it's just, like, I'm just enjoying the hell out of it, because it's like, it's just a really funny show, for that audience. And a very diverse cast as well, like, really, both in front of and behind the camera. People who've never acted before, people who've never worked in TV before, like on the music, like we have this amazing composer who's, both hearing and vision impaired, and, has worked with, Peter Gabriel and Coldplay and people like that, but, never got a gig on TV. So they're like these kind of people, so it's just really great kind of creative ferment with new voices and new ideas coming in, and just feels like, I've done a lot of TV, but like this one feels fresh all the time, as we go. So.
That's remarkable. Because I think I'm right in saying you're now spearheading Kavaleer Originals. Is that where your focus is these days?
Yeah. So, I mean, Kavaleer Originals is, to be honest, it's always been there. It's just sort of broken out of, the production bit, and we had found ourselves 2 years ago, doing a lot of service work. We did Wonder Pets for Nickelodeon, the new Wonder Pet show that's on Apple Plus. And at the same time, we got some support from Screen Ireland to come up with a development strategy for the company. And up to this point, I'd done a lot of short films, which were very kind of adult. I've never done a short film for kids up until the special we did with Adam. But like, up to that, it was about like hostages in Beirut, the Israel-Palestine situation, the tragic, real life stories, the tragic death of a young man with rheumatic fever, these kind of things, like just stories, human interest stories that really kind of grabbed me, or that I had some personal connection to, and then the preschool stuff, which was increasingly diverse as well, right? But I thought there's this whole kind of swathe in the middle that we haven't looked at. And why are we not doing more, feature development, older kids stuff, even, maybe thinking about down the line doing some more live action, stuff like that. So, just so that we can expand out the way we approach stories, and also in a very challenging time for breaking IP, looking at new ways of getting content out, including like kind of digital first and, puppetry techniques, whatever. Right. So it was kind of a very much, sort of, okay, let's dump all the ideas in and see what comes out of it. And I realized then that we needed to kind of like do something separate from the branding from Kavaleer Productions, which is known for, doing a lot of kids work, into Kavaleer Originals, which is, everything from family up to adult, or from preschool up to adult, I should say. So, we're starting to trickle out the first couple of ideas now, from that process. We've developed a feature and, 4 TV shows, kids TV shows. The next one out is the adult show that we're working on. We're hopefully going to announce that soon. And then, who knows beyond that? But it's exciting, you know. It's just it's again, anything that sort of gets my brain sort of fired up is going to get the energy and the passion into it, and that for me is like, you know, it's not a guarantee of success, but it certainly helps.
Sure. I mean, you also speak about the generosity of other creatives in the work that you've done. You know, I think when you were talking about the Honey Wars and you know, the connections you made with that and what people gave into the project, and that sounds like something else that inspires you.
That was, I mean, yeah, with the Honey Wars, it was, you know, it was a random email that I got from Steve Woods, who wrote that book I mentioned, Drawing the Line, saying that he'd been in touch with John Berman and he wanted to do animation. So it was like, you know, first of all, I was like, why are you sending this to me? I was like, you know, John Berman, right? You know, so I was like, yeah, and then I'm not going to write that. I'm going to say, yes, when does he want to meet? So I went to meet him. He'd been living in Ireland, you know, all his adult life, you know, all his, you know, kind of professional life, let's say. And you know, he was in his late 80s at that point, and, you know, he was going to move back to the UK. So, to be closer to family. So, it was kind of like the last sort of year of John's time in Ireland. And I went down and spoke to him about his idea. And, you know, he'd written this very Burman-esque, fairy tale, you know, which had, you know, which different to, the kind of approach to fairies that I'd been used to seeing in movies and on TV. And I was like, kind of an edge to it. Do you know what I mean? So I was like, interesting how he's come at it. But it was his story that he used to tell his kids when they were little. They all remembered it. They're all in their 50s and 60s now, but they all remembered the story. So it was like this, he knew there was something in it. And he was like, well, you know, he's not able to direct, anymore, but, you know, he has more stories in him, and he had written this down. So we took that idea and worked with him on the adaptation, and just him, his family, the people around them have just been wonderfully supportive. And now we got to a stage where we were starting to look at, you know, who could we get in for cast and so on. And just, he's just brought amazing sort of list of, you know, internationally known talents, you know, who want to do it just through their personal connection with him, having worked with him or known him professionally. And they were like, yes, of course we'll do it, you know. So, yeah. And this, for me, these are people I would have thought, okay, we're going to do feature film and we'll build up to that over like 10 years, whatever. And it's like, boom, you know, you're getting these names attached on the first one. I know we're still working on the script. So, you know, it's very early days for that. But yeah, it sort of encourages me to, you know, that no matter how big you think a creative talent is, you know, they came from somewhere, and they remember the ones who helped them, you know. That's a very good way, you know, that's obviously the case with John Berman, and it's a good way of sort of conducting yourself professionally, I think. It's just to, you know, be nice, you know.
Yeah, sure.
You never know when you might need to draw in a favor at some points, you know, but it's like, it's, yeah, he's obviously kind of left a lot of, fond memories of, you know, of working with him as a director and as a writer in the past. And it's just that kind of, if you can do that at his level, then there's no excuse for the rest of us.
And have you got an option?
I do now, yeah. Like, I'm very good on options now. Like, that's one of my...
So I had to ask.
He's got an option, yeah. Well, thank you, Julian. Hold on. I'll be back in time. Just put me on mute.
Make a quick call. I'll be back. I mean, you know, I was joking at the beginning when we started chatting about karaoke and stuff, but, yeah, you know, and it's interesting what you were just saying about, you know, be nice. And it's amazing what, you know, everyone started somewhere, and people want to, you know, were very happy to give back, because the business of animation, I think, is very much based on people, personal relationships, and a recurring theme that I've heard throughout these podcasts is how great the people in animation are. So how important do you think the sort of professional social side of things are in moving projects and businesses along?
Yeah, I think it's it's very much a kind of a pressure release valve for a lot of us, right? It's the business can be very tough and can be punishing, and we're fortunate in that our calendar revolves around these kind of international markets and conferences, which are where you get like other people, like-minded individuals coming together, and all coming from high pressure environments and kind of just saying, okay, we've got 3 or 4 days. We're going to work hard and we're going to play hard. And that's what they do. And for me, it's like that. I often say to Gary, that's my dojo. I love landing, day one, and I've got a schedule of 50 meetings ahead of me. And I know I'm going to be going from 8 a.m. till God knows what hour. And there's the meetings that you do during the day. And then there's the kind of the chance encounters and the kind of the late night conversations. And you do never know really which is going to lead to. I think the late night conversations don't lead to a huge amount of business, to be quite frank, but they do build relationships over time. And, you do get, it's like you can kind of see like, if you're having a conversation with somebody and you're 45 minutes in, at 2 a.m, then, maybe you can do a 3-hour business call person, on a very difficult negotiation. So it's just those kind of, but it's a small industry, I know we sort of tag ourselves onto bigger markets like Nipcom, which is massive, for many of your listeners will know what that is. But it's, but our industry, particularly in the kids space is fairly small, and after not so many years, you do get to know pretty much everybody. And, I'm getting to know new people coming in now, but, we sort of all know each other really at this point. And there are definitely super connectors within that. People like Adina Pitt, you'll know, who is very much kind of like brings, her, famous dinners that she does, where it's almost like it's like a family event almost, and, just bringing people together and talking about their news, whose kids graduated, who had a baby, who got engaged, that kind of thing. And that really, when you get all of those people around and, you throw a stick, you're going to hit somebody of influence. There, you do realize how small it is, and how important it is, to be kind of convivial and social within that, because it is a tough business.
No, it is. You're absolutely right. And I agree with you. I think the social side, professional social side of the markets and things like, the festivus drinks, which, Rob at Festivus is rolling out there, there's London, there's been Glasgow, there's Brighton, there's Annecy, where everyone gets together and has a bit of a chin wag and catches up. And, you hear things and people say, oh, so-and-so's looking for something new to do. They're coming to the end of the conference. Oh, great. I'll give them a buzz. I'll see if I've got something for them. It's a really, really important part of who we are and what we do.
Yeah, it is 100%. It's, and I think, it's also, there's a certain, you mentioned the karaoke, and that is definitely something that, you can see who takes themselves seriously and who doesn't. Karaoke is leveler, I call it. It's like, it's like, there are obviously gods in that space, like Jamie Badminton and Lee Harity and people like that, there's people like myself who are, God loves a trier, but what I lack in talent, I make up for in enthusiasm, but it's definitely something that, it's almost like your kind of end of year social when you're in college or something. It's something, you all feel a little bit young at heart at those kind of events. And it's just good fun.
I couldn't agree more. Listen, we're coming to the end of this now. It's been fantastic talking to you. I just wanted to ask you just a couple of quick sort of final questions because, 21 years is a long time to be at one studio, even if you own it. During that time.
It's 24 actually.
Oh, it's 24, is it? I do apologize.
24, yeah. No, that's okay. 24. Yeah, big one next year.
Okay, well, obviously going to be a party. I expect the invite.
Oh, yeah. You're on the list, Julian.
Thank you very much. Well, I am now.
Not Rob, though. No, Rob. No.
Okay. Okay, so I'll start that again. 24 years is a long time to be at one studio, even if you own it. What do you think was the best piece of advice that you've ever received during that time?
Oh my God, that's a real, where do you see yourself in 5 years?
It is, isn't it? Yeah.
What's the best piece of advice? I mean, to be honest with you, it's, the people you work with, like if you're starting a company, the best piece of advice I ever got was from Anne Tweedy, who was, who was with Boulder Media for many years as a producer, production manager, and, she had a company called Arbutus at the time, and myself and Robert Cullen, who were animators on a Flash web series called Flash Boyfriends. We were fed up working for the guy. I won't mention his name, but we were working for this guy. We didn't really enjoy it. So we were like, let's start our own company. We could do this. So we went out to Anne, because Rob had met Anne somewhere, and said, so she was in this little company called Arbutus. And she said, now she took a look at us and she went, you guys, and there was a third wheel there, Avian O'Reilly. So the three of us were going to set up this amazing studio. And she said, you're going to spend more time together than you do with your spouse. You're going to spend more time than you will with your kids. You're going to fall out, all this stuff is going to happen, blah, blah, blah. And just said, look, be absolutely sure that this is what you want, because this is, this is a reality, particularly in the early years of the business. So that was really good advice for me. I didn't take it all on board, to be quite honest with you. But it is, it's something you want to be very sure of. And I think what happens is a lot of companies start with kind of, instead of complementary skill sets, and this is just normal, you get people who have all the kind of same type of skill set starting company, and then usually there's a creative power struggle at some point, right? So, I think now the businesses that we're seeing evolving out of the space, the new ones are definitely they're definitely more aware of, you need the guy who's a bit business oriented, you need the kind of sales guy, you need the kind of background guy who's going to do the creative, so I think that was great advice when starting the company. And the best advice, I've ever received during that time. Oh my God. Well, my dad told me, I remember when I applied for frameworks that time, I told you I hadn't got the option, and did the interview, and the letter came in and said, you have been awarded 35,000 whatever to make this short film. And I ran in to my parents, I was living at home at the time, I ran into my parents and I showed them, and he goes, my mother was like, oh, that's great, wonderful, well done. My dad was just sitting there, no reaction, and I was like, what do you think, Dad? And he says, I'll get excited when the money is in the bank account.
That's a really good bit of advice. That's such a good,
I was like,
yeah. That
is, how many times have we gotten that letter since and gone to the pub and had a few pints and whatever else? And suddenly, is the money in the bank account? Yeah, it's not. So, my dad probably gave me the best bit of advice I ever had.
That's brilliant. It's very, very good advice. Okay, final question. Yeah. Most important question. Okay. If you were going to be singing a karaoke duet, who would you choose to sing with, and what would the song be?
Okay, well, I can answer that question very easily because I did this at the weekend in a very impromptu way. Myself and Alex Wiseman did Something Stupid.
I've heard Alex sing. Yeah, I can imagine that. Yeah.
And I also did, there's a guy called Jody Gannon, who's an Irish producer based in Berlin. And he's also got this ridiculous talent for playing like blues piano and jazz piano. And every time I see him, which isn't that often, I will find a piano and I will sit Jody down, and he was doing Hit the Road Jack and, all kinds of stuff. And we were all trying to sing along in a very, very loud bar. It wasn't karaoke, but yeah. Anyway, there you go.
Brilliant.
Only had an ad. I don't believe it.
Andrew, listen, I can't thank you enough for taking the time. I know how crazy busy you are, but it's been an absolute pleasure chatting to you. Thanks so much.
There you go, another cracker of an episode. Many thanks to Andrew for taking the time to talk to Julian, and I hope you all enjoyed it. Don't forget to like and subscribe and share with your friends and colleagues, and I'll see you all in person at the next Festivus event. And the show wouldn't happen at all without the wonderful work of Janet Balmforth at Liberia Consulting for her incredible organisational skills, to Julian Scott at Film London for his charm, wit and talent as our host. Find out more about Film London at filmlondon.org.uk. and the edit skills of Odelia Sickinger, who is also an awesome kids development and production executive. Find her on LinkedIn. Thank you all, and see you in the funny pages.